All right, we're back, and it is COMP2007. That's Enterprise Computing for the summer 2016 semester, week 4, part 1 of our broadcast. And what we're talking about today is database and entity framework and a bunch of other stuff. So I got a lot of stuff going on up here that we got to talk about. One of the things we were asked you guys to do last week is put together your database to be prepared for today. So one of the activities we're going to do is making sure that you're connected with your SQL database online and that you've set everything up properly. So let's go to the Azure portal now. Now I'm hoping that everyone has access at this point to Azure, right? If you don't have access to Azure at this point, I'd be very worried, because next week, as you'll see, you have your first project that's going to be due. I'm going to release the details of that later tonight. I'll give you some details. I'll try and record as much as I have today, so it's recorded for the other classes as well. It's still a work in progress because I'm taking a project that we worked on together, Rich and I worked on together, and we're modifying it for this. It's going to be pair programming. So what I want you to try and do, like I said last week, is program with somebody else. Try not to do it on your own. And I know it's challenging for some people because of schedules, because of relationships, conflicts, whatever the reasons are. It could be also work schedules, school schedules, and whatever. But it's going to make it so that there's 2 people that's going to work on this thing. This is a project that's going to take time each week. It's not something that's going to be something we leave until the last minute. So each week there'll be a deliverable like we've done before, and we'll talk about that. For now, let's go into this management server portal and go to your database that you created. Mine is called COMP2007. I'm going to click on this thing. So what you should have is the fully qualified domain name of your database server, right? Which is, mine is COMP2007 database.windows.net. Notice the structure, COMP2007 database.windows.net. Database.windows.net is the subdomain that's allowed here at Georgian, right? But we still need to modify it a little bit. If I click onto it, actually on the name itself, the database name, I have 2 things. One to note is server admin is right here. So that is your name that you need to use to log in. Your password is your password. If you forgot your password, you're going to need to reset it. And sometimes what ends up happening is, let's see how it says reset password. Sometimes what happens is it takes time for this to propagate. So if you've muffed this up, sometimes it's easier just to recreate the whole thing. It takes a shorter time sometimes. Hopefully that will not be the case. Also notice that when I clicked on the link for the server name, I also got a secondary settings page. Like if I just go back here again, let me just go back here so you can see it. So initially when I go there, when I click on my database, I come to this page, and there seems to be settings here. These aren't the droids we're looking for. Okay, this isn't the settings page we're looking for right here. We need to click on this, which is going to produce a secondary settings page over here, right? Notice that it says COMP2007 settings here. If you scroll down, you can see the area that says firewall. We need to modify this firewall area, like I mentioned last week, to include a rule name like anyone. I've included this rule name. You just type it in there in the space, and then the starting IP is 0.0.0.0, and then 255.255.255.0. What this does, although it's not very secure, it opens up the IP range so that you can access the database as an administrator from anywhere, right? So that's why it's not secure. For us, though, what we're doing is we're making it so that we have access, we can play with the database, and so on, okay? So please make that change to your firewall settings. If you do not make the change, then the database, you will not be able to access the database from the school, okay? So that's the first thing. Or also from home, right? Now you could also add in the client IP that you're currently on, but notice, like I said before, like last week, it's 192.139.153.3.6, which doesn't make any sense. It won't work. So that's the first step. Then you got to click on save. If you don't click on the save button, it will not take. Your changes will not take effect. That's the first thing. So I've called my server name COMP2007.database.windows.net, and I've also called my database the same name, COMP2007. How did I do this? I went to New. When I created my database, I went to Data and Storage. Right? As an example, I clicked on SQL Database, which you should have done already. You put in the database name there. You pick your subscription type. look, this is new. Create new or use existing. The interface changed last week. So if you click use existing, you would create an existing resource. It's got to be a blank database. You pin it to your dashboard. And then what you do is you configure the server, and this is where you decide what server you're going to use. Now you can only have, this is for your DreamSpark account, and not just for everyone, but for this course, we can only have one database per server, per region, right? Which means we really can only have one database, right? The database, unfortunately, is limited to 50 megabytes. It's not big. So, I mean, you can store lots of little data, but no pictures and images, and nothing big in the database. We have to be creative around using it. It's a free account, so that's why it's the way it is. It's a full featured SQL server. You can store procedures, views, all kinds of stuff in the database. We won't be doing that in this course. I'm not going to be requesting. This isn't a database course, right? It's just allowing us to use some data. So from a persistent data perspective, we use the database. That's what we want to try and do that for, okay? Notice that we have a server admin login. This is where you would have put it in. Your username, your password goes here, and you definitely wouldn't pick Brazil South. You'd probably pick something like, you know, if you're going to change or select a region for your server, you'd probably pick something like Canada Central or Canada East, something like that, right? And then you would create your database with a fully qualified name. So whatever the database name is, the server name, .database.windows.net, and then the database would be something separate altogether. So we're going to see these two things, one, the database, and the other, the server. Everyone okay with that right now? Everyone's got a server? Okay. Some people are still having issues, and I'm recording this for other classes, not just for this class. With connecting to Azure, I did receive a note from Greg, the CS Tech here at Georgian. What he did say was this. He said, look, you have to, if you've registered before and you never responded to your email that you got when you first joined, you know, Georgian, right? When you first registered for Georgian, they sent you a registration information about DreamSpark, and if you hadn't done that, then you have to re-register, right? It's not something that you can have done, never touched, and then all of a sudden, oh, I got to register for Azure, and now I want to use it. Can't do that. So you have to send him a note. You have to send a note to Greg, the CS Tech, right, here at Georgian, and then he will re-energize your DreamSpark account if required, if that's not functioning properly. You do not need to pay for this. If you notice, I'm using a DreamSpark subscription for the SQL database, right? And it's week 4, so if anyone still has issues with DreamSpark and Azure, by now it should be all taken care of. Okay, so that's the first thing. So your SQL database, we're assuming, has been set up. Let's take a look at Visual Studio, right? So that's the next step. So here's my VMware Fusion. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this into a full screen mode for a second, just so that we can see, you know, the Windows 10 here. I'm going to just shut down this Google window, and I'm going to launch Visual Studio here in the VM. Okay, with Visual Studio, we're not going to launch a project from the beginning. What I want to do is set up the connections for your database. That's the most important thing. So please close down your start page for now. All right. I want you to do 2 things. One, let's take a look at Server Explorer. Right, Server Explorer. Notice that I have something different than what you might have. If you're using Visual Studio 2013, I might have something like this. One says Open Cloud Explorer to view all subscriptions. It says 1 or more subscriptions are not supported by my Server Explorer because I have both pay-as-you-go and DreamSpark, right? I can click this close right now. Now, one thing it does is to note is you have to be signed in to take advantage of this connection to the server. So if you're not signed into Visual Studio 2015 or 2013, please sign in now. Not signed in won't work, okay? Next, if I click on Server Explorer and I click this little button, you may or may not see this little Azure connection in Server Explorer. If I open it up, you might see, and I sometimes am able to connect to the SQL database. So if I kind of go in there, I notice it didn't come up for me this time. Or storage, if I go to storage, you know, as an example, I have some storage accounts that I've set up. I can see those, right? but somehow when it comes to my SQL databases, not available for me to see. You might see something slightly different because from your perspective, you don't have a double account like me. I have, pay as you go on the other one, and this is what's clashing. But we need to set up some kind of connection. And my recommendation to everyone now, because we've done this now, this is the third time I'm doing this, is find the window that says View SQL Server Object Explorer. That's what I want you to look at now. SQL Server Object Explorer, which is the fourth or fifth selection down in your view. When I pull it up, it looks like this. All right. Now you might not see all these local databases. I have this because I've installed Visual Studio and SQL Server Express for different versions of Visual Studio, and I have a few of them that are still running. I also have something else. This is my database, COMP2007 database.windows.net. You need to have this, but in order for you to get this, the easiest things. Now, you may not see what I see if you don't have Visual Studio 2015. If you have Visual Studio 2013, it will look different than this, right? So click on Azure. Notice that if you're signed in, you should see the database. Do not click on master. That's not the database you want, right? It's this one, COMP2007, or whatever you called yours. It's your custom name for the database, not the master database of the server, this one. Now that you're here, you can see that I have my fully qualified domain name for my server, COMP2007 database.windows.net here. And the type of authentication should be SQL Server authentication, not other default authentication. I've got my username that it comes up with, and I need to put in my password for my administrative account, not for Azure. This is for only for the database that you created, that password. All right, so let's put that in. Now I'm going to click on Remember My Password, and notice that my database is named COMP2007. Yours might be named something different. Click Connect. When you do, you're going to see this line pop up right here, all right, which is the database, the server, as well as any databases that are inside that server. You should see only one, because you can only have one. There can be only one. Sorry for the Highlander references, but I can't help that one, right? So if that's true, right, this is where we're going to do all our work today. Do you have access? Is anyone having trouble accessing their server? If you have trouble, it may be because your IP address range isn't correct. So check your server. That's one reason why it may not happen. Or you didn't log in properly. You forgot your username or password. That might be the other problem. Or you're using an older version of Visual Studio 2013, and unfortunately in the school computers, it may not be compatible with Microsoft Azure the way it is. So what do you need to fix this? Sometimes what we require is, if I go back to Tools, if I go to Extensions and Updates, you may see in Updates, if you're using Visual Studio 2013, an area that comes up with Azure SDK Update 2.9 something or another. If you're using Visual Studio 2013, please update your machine. That means the people that are using the lab machines here, you may have to do that, okay? Otherwise, you will not connect to the cloud at all with your Visual Studio 2013. It may be a problem, okay? That's number one. Also, what I've installed is stuff that came with my installation of Visual Studio 2015 Enterprise Edition, which includes things like Cloud Explorer for Visual Studio 2015. So if you don't have that, you can certainly install this. And the other one that I think might help you as well is if I kind of scroll down here to this one, Microsoft Azure Storage Connected Services, right? This one here, which is also part of the whole package. So those two is probably something that you would like to see, as an example inside your package. And there's others here that I have here, but I don't think there's anything related that I could look at that has to do with Visual Studio. Like Data Lake for Azure, who cares? We're not going to do that. We have other things that I've included here for other applications. For example, I have ASP.NET and Web Tools. That's probably provided right away when you log in and download Visual Studio. Excuse me. But that's about it, those two. So you can check that. Now, after you've done that, sometimes what it does to help, it helps to download and install Cloud Explorer, because Cloud Explorer, like I mentioned before, is the other way to get a connection. So there's two ways. One is through Server Explorer, as an example, which could take you to Cloud Explorer. Cloud Explorer looks like this. It's a little different. If you're logged into Azure, what it'll do is it'll populate your servers like this one. So here's your server, COMP2007, and here's your database, COMP2007. They're the same, right? But if I want to look at my server, right, as an example, if I right-click, I can open it in the portal and manage it here if I want to, but it'll give you access to different things. That's what it'll actually allow you to do. Also, I'll give you access to look at all your web apps that you have live. So you can manage that whole thing right here inside Visual Studio, which is pretty cool, right? But where you really want to connect, like I said before, is SQL Server Object Explorer. This is the place to do it, right? Where you click on this button here, Add SQL Server, right? Now again, when you do this, right, you're going to get this. Don't click local or network. It's Azure, the one you want, right? And again, if you're logged in, you're going to get that option to select the database that's available. All right, so is everyone logged in? Okay, is there anyone not logged in? Okay, so that's because you're a machine local to your lab, right? The lab machine, and you're having a problem. You have to upload that stuff and maybe update your machine, I'm guessing. Okay, and you having just a problem, or is it? Okay, so I'll let you install, and maybe I can get one of you guys to give him a hand if there's a problem with him getting going, because I want to kind of move on, right? All right, so now that we got that piece done, all right, that's one of the pieces we need to get. We don't have our connection, we can't go anywhere from this, all right? So the next piece, last week we created a template, right? We're not going to start from scratch. We created a template that we're going to be using. And what I recommend to you, again, is, instead of starting from scratch, is let us use the template from last week. So we're going to go File, New, Project, right? And what we're going to do here, is I'm going to find the template. We're going to do it a little bit differently than I've done earlier in this class, in the classes today, only because I want to get that template stuff going. And then what we're going to do is we're going to patch up our little database online so that you guys have the latest, so all the same tables that I have. I'm going to give you a little patch to that. Okay, to find your template from last week, you're going to go to Visual C#. And if we did it properly, if you exported it to your C#, you should see it down here, COMP2007. There might be a template. If you don't, you can always search for it over here. So you can kind of, if you named it template, you can just search for template, and then it'll come up, right? It'll kind of filter the template here. So if I want to filter for COMP2007, right? I can do that. I can filter that. I know that's my template. These are my 3 templates. Okay. So that's important to be able to do. So grab one of these templates then, and then I'm going to grab template C because that's the one you and I built together, right? And then what I'm going to do is modify this. Now, I recommend for you, because when we do this lecture today in lab, it's really lab 3. We're going to build one part of lab 3 that's going to be due, or we're going to get the assignment next week. So lab 3 is going to be given to you next week. You'll probably have until, I'm thinking Monday of the following week to get it done, because it's a little bit larger than normal, right? And it requires full CRUD and access to data and everything else. It's not easy. It's not an easy lab to get through as compared to the other ones. Still worth 2%, but it's a little bit more involved because we're doing data, right? And we're doing CRUD. You're finishing off this little site that we're going to build today. Okay, so I would recommend that you name it Lab 3, all right? COMP2007 Lab 3, so you can actually use this and upload this to GitHub and so on. Okay, I'm going to call it lesson, sorry, I'm going to name it properly this time, Summer 2016, Lesson 4C. And like I said, I was a little discombobulated in the middle of class. I think the first section was pretty tough. Second section, I was discombobulated, had all kinds of technical issues with my machine as well. My Visual Studio crapped out and so on. And now with this one, I'm pretty confident we're going to get through this in fairly good time. So let's look at lesson 4C, and then what we're going to do is make sure you have create new Git repository and create directory for solution and press OK. If you want to, because let's suppose that you feel like your template isn't as good as mine or whatever, you can certainly wait until I'm done. You can download from GitHub, and then when you download from GitHub, you can open my GitHub repo as a new Visual Studio. Thank you. A new Visual Studio project, and then create another template from my repo, right? So that way your template is exactly like mine. So give me a second while I create this. I'm going to put it together here on GitHub. I'll put it up on so you guys can access it, and then we can all be on the same page, right? Otherwise, what's going to end up happening is we're just going to I might be a little bit different than you. Yours may not work like mine. Okay. All right, so I've got this stuff up in Solution Explorer. I'm just going to quickly populate it here in Team Explorer. So I'm going to click Team Explorer here. And this is the great thing about using Visual Studio, right? I can go right into Sync, and notice that in 2015, I have a GitHub option. I'm going to choose this one this time. And right in there, I can go right in and create inside my Georgian College organizational account, I can create a new repo called COMP2007 Summer 2016 Lesson 4C immediately, and we're done. So go ahead, download my stuff. That's how fast it is, and that's why I recommend it. And 2015 is so amazing when it comes to that stuff because it has a direct connection with GitHub. 2013, we've left it behind now. All right, it's we're trying. It's good, but it's still awesome. 2013, but I mean, for this kind of stuff, 2015 takes the cake. All right, while this is happening, while you guys are downloading it, I will continue to explain other things. One of the things we're going to do with our Server Explorer, if I go back to SQL Server Object Explorer, is a couple of things here. I'm going to pin this up here for example. Notice that I have access to my database, but I can actually, like this is my server, but I can click into my database as well. I can also go right to the table view. Now, I mean, typically we wouldn't use this to manage your database. What you would use is this, which is SQL Server 2014 Management Suite, right? I'm going to bring this up for a second so you can see what I'm talking about here. Now, you may not have access to this if you're not using the lab machine, but you can certainly download it for free through DreamSpark. All right, so I'm going to bring this up in a second. Let's see if it actually cranks up. Meanwhile, let me go to DreamSpark and tell you where you can get it. So where do I get SQL Server Management Suite? Well, on DreamSpark, like I said. So where is that? I'm going to go up here, and actually I'll go to another tab here because I want those tabs. I want to go to DreamSpark. So here's Microsoft DreamSpark at Georgian, right? And if you notice down here, there's also a link to SQL Server 2014, right? If I click on this link, notice that I go down here and I can see that there's a bunch of downloads. One of them is SQL Server 2014 Management Studio with Service Pack 1. So you can download this for free, right? And you can use this SQL Server Management Server if you really want to. It's much better than the stuff that we do within Azure. However, for our course, because our course is not a database course, I'm going to focus strictly in Azure. But you can certainly go ahead and for your own self, if you want to have more control, download this SQL Server 2014 Management Studio. All right. Now, what does it look like when I pull it up? I can put my fully qualified domain name for my my database. I can log in, and when I connect, I have more control, right? Because what I can do is I have the connection. I can look at the database, and I can look at the tables, and I can do individual query and everything else in here. Now, I'm not going to use this here because this is kind of out of scope for my course, right? But you can certainly do that if you wish, as an alternate, right? Let's just close this off. All the stuff you can do there in a very limited fashion, you can do here, right? So notice that I have 4 tables. I'm going to drop these tables because I don't need them. I want to rebuild them with you, you know? So I'm going to delete them. Well, how we drop tables in Azure, we right-click on the actual table. I'm showing you how, kind of in a reverse way because you won't need to do this now, but one day you will if we need to, if you're experimenting. And I'm going to click Update Database. It just tells me the kind of code. And then it should function in the way that once I connect, in a short time, this table will disappear. There it is. And I'll do the next one. I can only do one table at a time because it's going to run a script. And here's the script, drop departments table. That's what it's really doing, update table database. And we'll keep doing this kind of thing. And let's do the next one. I'm dropping them all. You will not have these tables right now. I have the tables because I've done this demonstration two other times, right? So for me, I'm just getting rid of them so you can see how it's done. And then once we're done, I'm giving you a chance also to catch up to me because sometimes I go a little fast, right? And then once I'm done here, we'll be able to continue. All right, so there we go. So I'm table free pretty much in a second. I'm just like you. I have a database and no tables. So where do I get these tables from? Well, up on Blackboard, I have an area in your week 4, right, weekly learning, that says Contoso DB file. Contoso database is part of the Contoso University sample database that Microsoft supported and produced. Now, Rich, on my companion when it comes to this course, and the course leader, what he's done is he's kind of created this little SQL database, and this is an excerpt from that. So if you download this file, please put it on your system somewhere. Download this file from here. When you have this file, what we're going to do over here is we're going to import or use this file to build back our server. Now, this file includes things like 4 tables, like we just deleted. Also, external foreign keys to different tables, relations between each table, which is important, as well as some data, right? So that you have everything to start you going, to get you an understanding of how all these things work, all right? So how do I put them together? Well, again, there's different options. If I click on my database, not my server, my database, if I right-click, I can perform a query, right? So I can do a query. But this is not what we want, because when I perform a query, it comes to here, and I have to either type it in or copy it in, right? That's not what I want. I want actually what I want to do is I want to go File, Open, File. And when I open the file, what I want to point to is wherever you put that Contoso SQL file, I want you to click onto it and press Open. What this will do is pull up the SQL file like this. However, you're not done yet, right? Because if you notice, there's no database connected here. This is just the file. So there's 2 options. You can go back here, do a query, and then copy and paste, or you can connect by clicking this button. Let's connect. When I connect, I'm going to have this little dialog that pops up again. I'm going to go to Azure, click my database, click onto it, go down here with my username, my admin name, and go in here and put my password. And then click Remember Password and click Connect. When I do that, it puts the name of my database up here, and both of these buttons are active. If you don't have both buttons active and the name of your database in the middle, you cannot execute this code. And this code is T-SQL that, like I said, Rich has written. And what it does, if we go through it a little bit, is it kind of just describes each table, the students table with a student ID, last name, first mid name, and enrollment date, as well as last name and first name being 50 characters long. How it starts off, so each student ID starts off with this many characters with 3000 and so on. Also, a link or a constraint that hooks this thing up with a foreign key. And as we continue going, you can see that there are different tables, enrollments, departments, and courses, as well as all the foreign key requirements and values. So this is just data that you can import. That's what this thing is. I'm just going to go all the way down to the bottom, just in case someone wants to record this and try it on their own. Right? There we go. I know I've experienced this. This is all the data. And then what you want to do is click this button to execute your query. When you do that, if you're connected properly, you're going to see this: 1 row affected, 1 row affected, 1 row affected. If everything is good, you'll see query executed successfully. Now, on the left, this is where you're going to notice the change. The change is not going to happen here. The change is happening on your tables. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. You can wait, or you can just click refresh. When you refresh, let's close this off now. If I go in here, you can see that it's refreshing. I go to databases. I click on my database. I look at tables, and slowly, slowly, it's going to refresh all the tables back the way they were, as you can see. You should see this now. Does anyone have trouble, other than people who are already having trouble, doing this? Because if you don't do this, you can't build your lab. Okay? Are you guys good? Spinning? I know, it takes some time. Again, it's going to be the same thing, the same process, right? You got them all? Okay. So once you get this, all the data that we're going to be working with for the next week, this week, next week, as well as we're going to build some other tables in here for security. So we're going to actually talk about security week 3, right? So this is the first week of data. I'm giving you your first part of project 1. It's due next week. Second week of data, we're doing the second part of CRUD, right? And then you have a little lab. Third week of data, we're going to do security, right, for data. And then you'll have everything you need to finish up your project for week 7. On week 7, we're going to have a practical exam. There's not going to be any multiple choice true false on this one. We've been doing multiple true false every time we do this, every time we do a quiz. I'm not going to test you on more theory on that exam. It's going to be purely practical. You're going to have to build something. You're going to be given a template. And from the template, you're going to build a small site based on all the things we know. You're going to have to know how to do things. So you'll have some things functional, and there'll be other things you have to build. Like, for example, you won't have, if you have to connect to a database, the database either will be local to the template, right, on the exam, so a local database, or your connection strings should all be working so that you can connect to a database that I provide you, right? One of the two. That's what will happen on the exam. And then what's going to happen is you're going to have to do all the things that you know. It's going to be open book, open internet. The only thing you can't do is talk to each other, but you'll have access to all your resources. Any code, GitHub, all that stuff is your own, right? So there's nothing that's going to be hidden. That's the way we run our exams. At the end of the day, you'll have 3 hours to produce your whatever it is. So it's good to get you, practice on how to do this kind of stuff here. That's why these the labs and everything else, and that's good that when you partner with somebody else after your assignment number 1, someone wants to get your feet kind of wet on this stuff, and then your project number 1, which is coming up, again later today, I'll give you the details. That's going to give you more of a chance to practice some, again, some deeper skills when it comes to ASP.NET Web Forms. And again, we're going to be moving, remember the second half of this semester, we're doing ASP.NET MVC, which is much more exciting, and a little bit of Web API. I'd like to try and introduce that as well. And maybe if we have time, Angular at the end, where we can combine Angular on as a front end and Web API as a back end, right? And we'll talk about that. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so we've got our database structure. Everything's good. We have our template tables. I'm just going to close this off for now, so we don't need it. And I'm going to go open up my Solution Explorer. We have to make some changes to my template now, all right? And this is what we did this morning. Notice that I have some structure. If I run this thing here, I'm going to run this thing here. Notice that you're going to see I'm running the whole thing, so I'm actually debugging, running with debugging here. When this pulls up eventually, one day, you're going to see it come up with, again, I'm running it in Chrome. By the way, I recommend you test your apps in both Chrome and Firefox, and maybe even Edge, if you have a chance to do that. So that way, when we get to the final debugging stages of this stuff, you have an opportunity to have tested everything. Okay, so this is a very generic site. We need to change this to match what we're doing. We're making a site for Contoso University, where we manage things like students, courses, and departments, and all that kind of stuff, right? So we need to change the brand. We need to add some links here. Right now, we only have 2, home page and a contact link page. This is okay, but we want to add additional pieces here, okay? Obviously, you want to change your contact info, so it's not me, it's you. All right, let's like close this off now and stop debugging. And what I want to do here, now that I've built the project, is I want to start off by modifying our site master page. So let's go to site master. When we bring this up, I noticed that I got a couple things going on. One is I've got a user control that I'm using called Navbar, and we've set it to the ID of primary nav. Okay, let's bring up my primary nav. We've got to modify this one first. So I'm going to go to user controls. Underneath user controls, I have my Navbar, double click. And notice that I have, I'm just going to unclick this for now. We have a couple of links. I need to add a couple more, 3 more actually, and modify my Navbar brand. Let's do the Navbar brand first. So now it's not called brand, it's called Contoso University. There we go. Right. My Fort Awesome was a nice icon for demonstration purposes, but we need to use something else. And my recommendation is something to do with school, right? Like, for example, courses or school or something. And again, if you want to look that up, we can go to Font Awesome. So here's Font Awesome, right? And if I look at icons, right? And if I want to search for them, and if I go to something like school, right? Graduation cap I want to use for, I think I want to use this for courses, right? And if I go to course or learn, let's go to learn, right? There's something called lean pub. I think I want to use this one. So I want to use lean pub. Maybe I'll do it the other way around this time. Maybe we'll do graduation cap for the university and lean pub for courses. All right, so let's do that. So graduation cap first. And what it does is FA graduation cap. It's a little different than what I did earlier today. It's okay. It's just an icon. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into here and paste it inside of this. I'm going to just get rid of this. And this, Control V here. So FA graduation cap. That's all it is. That's one. Second, I want to change. I want to copy additional things here. So let's try this out. So I'm going to copy this home page, right? Copy and copy it 4 times, right? So, or 3 times, I mean. So this is for my students. This is for my courses. This is for my departments. I need those. And I'm going to name them that way. So my IDs for each of these is going to change. This is going to be students. Let's make those changes. This is going to be courses. And this is going to be departments. There we go, departments. Right, and inside here we have default ASPX. Obviously that's wrong. We're going to make this students.aspx. This is going to be courses.aspx. We don't have these yet, but we're going to add them in. And this is going to be departments.aspx. And I also want to change the link name. So this is students, leaving the space there for the icon, courses and departments. There we go. So 3 different ones. And then the icon should change. So students, obviously that's going to be our our lean. So it's going to be not from this one. I'm going to go back one. If I put learn, actually you get something called lean pub. And I like this one. It's not a bad little one. So copy this FA lean pub. Copy. And I'm going to put that inside where it says students. So I'm going to kind of copy it across this one and press Control V, so lean pub. For courses, I'm going to choose book, right? It's a nice book. And for departments, I'm going to choose puzzle piece. Now, puzzle piece is actually spelled, if I put in puzzle, actually spelled puzzle-piece. So grab that, puzzle piece. Again, you can choose whatever you like, but I think this makes sense if you think about it. And then just kind of put that in there. There we go. Oh, I got the wrong one. So it should be puzzle-piece. Puzzle-dash, right, PIE. So yeah, there we go. Puzzle-piece. Okay, good. So we've kind of got that look and feel that I want here. Let's test what I have just so that I know that I'm on track. So Control F5, run without debugging kind of stuff, right? And what it'll do is it'll bring up Chrome, and we'll see my navbar is changed now to home, students, courses, departments, contact, and Contoso University. Nice. Okay, I want to include a couple things. One, I want to be able to kind of, when I click on one of these things, I want to know what page I'm on. Remember, I have to update my navbar user control in order for me to do that, right? So let's go into the navbar again. So, but I want to go into my user control code behind file, right? So I'm going to click on View this time and click Code, or F7, one of the two. And what you're going to see is you go down here, I see that I have my page title. I'm switching by page title, and what I want to do is add in a couple of additional or 3 additional cases. So I'm going to copy this one and paste it 3 times. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, now I'm not looking for the home page all the time. The first one is going to be students. And if I'm searching for the student's title, I'm also going to change the student's ID, right? So that's what I'm switching. And then I'm looking for courses, the courses title. And then courses are the attributes that I'm changing on my navbar. And then the last one is departments. So departments. And in here, I would use the departments ID. Or so this is all the page switching I'm doing, so I can keep track of which is the active page. That's what I'm doing here. Probably what I want to do here, because I've made a version 2, I'm going to go kind of version 2 here, 0.2, and something like updated set active page method to include new links. That's what I've done, right? And also I can change the date to today's date, because that's kind of what I've done. So it's June 2nd, 2016, right? And I can save that. So this, when I update this to GitHub, it'll keep these changes, right? Okay, so again, a little different than what I did earlier today. So I've got this set active page done. I can close this off, and I've got my navbar done. I can close this off, right? And now that I've updated my navbar, this is a great place to add a commit, because I've changed a feature of my site to change the and then notice that the navbar is the only feature that changed. So one feature, one change, if I can. And I'm going to say something like updated navbar user control to include new links to students page, students, sorry, courses and departments pages. So nice little update, commit all, go home, and click sync, and then push. So that'll update my commit, and there we go. All right, good, we've done that. Now the next piece that I want to do is I want to add in a sticky footbar or footer, right, to the bottom of my page to kind of frame my page a little better, where I can have some things like registration information, all that kind of stuff, and those things on the bottom of my page. So what I want to do is I want to include it in my form, and I want to make it a footer, but I want to follow the Bootstrap methodology for making it a sticky footer. And there's a couple of pieces to take care of here. One piece for the sticky footer bar is the Bootstrap classes and the structure from HTML. The next piece that I got to change is also a little bit of CSS that I'm going to get from a page, and I'm going to show you where that is. So let's get that now. So if I go to components, if I look at getbootstrap.com components navbar, right? If I look down here, there's an area here that says fixed to bottom. I want to make a navbar that's fixed to the bottom of my page. And I want to grab this, which is a navbar with a class of navbar, navbar default, navbar fixed bottom. I'm going to change some of this stuff, but I want this structure here. So I'm going to take it, copy it, and I'm going to go to the right where I'm going to have my stuff here, and I'm going to paste it in and make some modifications. So paste. We're not going to call it nav, right? We're going to call it footer because it's more semantically correct. That's what we want to do. I want to get rid of these little dots. That's just a stand-in for holder. And then what I want to do is I want to make a paragraph tag here with some content, right? So and we'll say and copy, right? And copy, which is the copyright symbol, right? And then we're going to say 2016, and we're going to say Contoso University. That's the university we're building. University, if I can spell it right. How about that? There it is, Contoso University. Okay, cool. There's some changes I need to make. First of all, I want to reformat my page because it's getting messy. So I'm going to Control A to select all, right-click on the selected page, and format selection, which is going to indent everything nice. Okay, that's number one. Second thing, what I want to do is I want to add some more CSS. First of all, it's navbar default. I don't want to have my navbar default. That's not the one I want. That's not the color that I want on my bottom bar. I want to have navbar fixed, but what I want to do is I can do this with a color. I can say background dash info. So it's going to be that light blue for my navbar. And the other thing is I want to put a class of footer on my navbar. Okay, class of footer. And I think there's another class I need to put on my paragraph tag. I want to put that in a second. Now, save that. I want to get my CSS. And there's another page that's a sticky footer. So getsbootstrap.com/examples/sticky-footer. That's where it is. And all I've done here, here's my sticky footer. This is what it's going to look like, right? What I want to have done here is I've gone right-click and inspect. And what I'm looking at is sources, right? So under sources, I can look at the index as well as the sticky-footer CSS. I want to grab all the CSS from my sticky-footer CSS here. I want to copy it. And I'm going to go back to Azure, and inside my Solution Explorer, where I have my content, I already have an app.css file that we made. Double-click. And then inside here where it says custom CSS goes here, I'm going to kind of write over this and Control-V to paste. Now, I don't need all this stuff, right? I don't need all of this. First of all, I don't want this background color. This background color is just wrong. So get rid of it, right? And my footer is, the height is 60 pixels, which is good. So I'm defining the height of my footer. My margin, I want a little bit more margin. Like right now it's 60 pixels and my margin is 60 pixels. So maybe what I do, I want to make this like 80 pixels for my margin, for my bottom, margin bottom. So give me a little bit of buffer, maybe 20 pixels from the bottom to whatever my content is. That's what I want to do. Okay, and on the bottom also, notice that my container is all scrunched up. Like they actually said my container maximum, the max size of my container is 680 pixels. That doesn't make any sense. I want to get rid of this too. All right. Notice also that there's another thing that has text muted. Text muted. I want to use text muted, that's for sure. And text muted is going to be part of my footer bar. So I want to select text muted with a margin of 20 pixels. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. These are optional values. But if I go back, you can see that in my site master, that right now I can add a class, right, of text muted, right, to my paragraph tag here, which is going to change the value of what this is doing. Okay, yay. So I got my footer, my navbar. This is how it's got to look here. And let me just get rid of the space here so we don't have any more spaces. And this footer is going to be below the div tag that contains my content placeholder. So it's always going to be in my page. Okay, cool. Let's go and update my app.css. So we'll get rid of this. And we'll close this down. My body margin bottom is 80. And notice that my HTML position is relative with a minimum height of 100%. So it's always going to be the height of my whole page. Let's close this down. Okay, cool. We've added CSS, and I've added a sticky footer. Let's test it to see if it works. So I'm going to hit Control F5. And what's going to happen is this is going to do on run without debugging again. And I should see my sticky footer bar at the bottom of my page right here. Okay. Notice also that when I click on contact, it pushes the buttons, push the sticky footer below it now, all right, which is good. It doesn't overlap, which is something that we would have a problem with if we didn't do that little CSS, right? So that's one of the issues, all right? So this is where our bottom bar is. And now we want to test these pages, students, courses, and departments, but of course they won't work yet because we haven't built them. All right, so let's kind of close this off, right? And what I want to do is now that we've added our sticky footer, there's another opportunity for a commit. So I'm going to go back to my Team Explorer. I'm going to go to Home. I'm going to go to Changes. Notice that the only thing that's changed is my Site Master, where I'm going to say I added a sticky footer. So added sticky footer to Site Master page. Okay, and then commit, commit staged. Go home, and I want to push. So sync and push. And I'm going to push that up to GitHub too. Yay, GitHub's all up to date now. Yes? Sure. Sorry, I went a little fast. But it's up on GitHub now. Okay. Right? Because I just pushed it. Right? So if you actually go up on Georgian College and you looked at if you look at it, you can see my whole repository. That's why I'm doing it all the time, so you guys can keep up. Right? So there's no chance that you'll be behind. All right, so we've got that little piece done. And now what I want to do is I want to add my other pages. So I want to go to Solution Explorer, and I want to add the pages that I'm missing. I'm missing my students page, my contacts, my courses page, and I'm missing my departments pages. I need to add those 3 pages in. We're not going to work on courses or departments That's going to be your job with your lab 3. All right. I'm only going to work on students, which is what we're going to work on today. All right. And next week a little bit. All right. So let's do that. So I'm going to go right click on my project, and I'm going to add. And if you don't have this already, you can go. If you don't have in your hot, or quick picks, if you will, your favorites. If you don't have web form with master page, you can simply go to new item and pick that. But I do, so I'm going to click on web form with master page, and I'm sure you do too if you've done this a couple times now. And I want to put in the first one, which is going to be called students. Press OK. Click the site master. Press OK. And let's do the next one. I'm just going to do them all in succession. So I'm going to do the next one, which is going to be courses. So let's add that in. So web form with master page. Here's courses. That's OK. And we'll do the next one. Add, and again, oops. And we'll do web form with master page. So courses and departments. There we go. Site master. OK. There we go. So all those 3 pages are done. So I'm going to click on my students now when Azure allows me to. Visual Studio, Azure Visual Studio. And when that's done, what I want to do immediately is take care of my title issues, because if I don't get my title, then I won't have that active page link happening, right? So my title for students is students. My title for courses is courses. And my title for departments is departments. Here's one thing. You should always put a title in your pages now, because you should be forced to, because if you don't, we might have a problem switching. It might cause an error in our page switching code if you have no title, right? So be careful about that. We don't have a default case. Maybe we want to build the default case later on, right? Okay, for now. So there's our departments, courses, students, and everything else. Let's save everything. Again, I'm going to close down my departments because I'm not doing that. I'm going to close down my courses because I'm not touching that today. But I will be touching students, and what I want to do is get rid of this piece, the top content placeholder. All right, so this is where we're going to be doing some of the work in here, right? But in order for me to do this work, again, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using a server control. If I go to Toolbox, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build my server control for my toolbox here, right? So I have, instead of my standard toolbox, I have data controls that I can use. So I can do things like my grid view. That's what I want to build, my grid view. And I want to place it inside of here, inside my students.aspx page. Okay. Now, before we continue, we really got to talk about this entity framework stuff I've been talking about so far. I'm saying I'm using the entity framework to connect to the database. Well, what is this entity framework, and what is it going to do for us? So let's bring that up. And of course, it's not here. Let's just bring it up over here. So if you go up into your Blackboard, you have a PDF version of this if you wanted to view it instead of looking at the board. So really what we're talking about here, I'm borrowing this excerpt from this book, ASP.NET 4.5.1, a Rocks book in C# and VB. It's 2014 edition, not bad. Still handles everything in Entity Framework. One of the ones that I'm looking at here is Entity Framework is this object relational mapper, an ORM, so to speak. And what it does is it allows us to use ADO.NET and link to connect with the database at the other end. So whether it's a SQL database or whatever kind of database we're connecting to. You can even use Entity Framework for connecting locally to a file-based database, Access database, whatever you want. It's just a method that we're using to create our data access and a persistent data in our application, web application. So what do I mean by this model-based system? What does it do? Well, what it does is allow us to quickly scaffold, right, our data objects, right, so that we can connect to the database, right, without having to write a lot of code, right? So that it helps us to scaffold that. And before, in previous years, this was a long, tedious process and error-prone because, you know, if you made typing errors or whatever, and it wasn't consistent, actually. Everyone did it in a slightly different way. But what this does is it kind of creates a consistency for us. We're going to use the Entity Framework not just for web forms, but also for MVC5 and MVC Core. All right, so what is this thing? Well, why do we use the Entity Framework? It's all around development time reduction, right? Because really, it's quick. It allows us to create quick quality connections with the database, and it has a kind of a three-pronged approach to doing this. We'll talk about this. But when you look at it from a model perspective, it looks like this. Here's your application. Your Entity Framework is the middleware, if you will. And then you have your ADO.NET framework, which connects directly with the database. So this is the low-level stuff, ADO.NET. Actually, there's a lower level than that. And what it does is it connects with your database directly, and we use the Entity Framework to pass through ADO.NET, use its objects and classes, and connect with our database. That's why it's called an object wrapper kind of thing. All right. So there's three things. This is what you're going to be tested on. If we're doing the next quiz, we talk about Entity Framework. There's going to be three methods that we use, right, or three approaches that we use to connect and set up our data for our application. Here's the first one, database-first approach. In this method, what we do is we have an existing database, right? And all we do is we take that database and Entity Framework connects to it, puts its fingers in the database, tries to feel around to see what kind of tables and connections and everything it has, and then from there, scaffolds out all the classes and the visual model, right, in an EDMX diagram that talks about almost like an ERD, if you will, for all the different entities in your database, which is kind of cool, right? So you have your database, and then you connect it with Entity Framework, and it creates all your classes and your model, which is kind of cool. That's one approach. Second approach is code-first approach. So you create your schema, just like we did in COMP2008. We created our schema to connect to things like Mongo database or a SQL in this case. And our schema is just a class that contains all the fields of our table and so on. Each table has its own class, schema, and so on. And from there, when we use Entity Framework to map out our database, now if we did that, our database would be wiped out, and also to create the visual representation of what our database would look like, a model, right? That's code-first approach. By the way, this is a very popular approach when it comes to MVC5, because you'll see all the tutorials are all code-first approach. We'll talk about advantages and disadvantages in a second. Then the last one is the model-first approach, which is you do everything in a business-oriented fashion. So you talk about business requirements. You draw everything out in a visual way. You do your ERD, each of these things, how they connect to each other, and then use the Entity Framework to scaffold out your code and create your database. So totally different approaches, and there's different advantages for each one. Which one are we going to use? So again, I'm going to test you on those three. So three different approaches. So database first, code first, model first, right? And then the last one is we're going to be using the database first approach. Why? Because why are we doing web forms? 80% of ASP.NET is all around web forms still out in the wild, if you will, right? Not a lot of MVC still. There's lots of competition for MVC out there too with Microsoft, right? But for MVC, it's a little bit more challenging. But for web forms, the great thing about that is it's quick, it's easy, everyone knows it, and the databases already exist for most of these sites. It's not like you have an opportunity to do a greenfield project where you're going to create the database, choose MVC, Node, whatever you want. Like no one has these choices typically in a large enterprise. If you're a little mom and pop shop or some kind of small, medium-sized business, yes. But in a large enterprise, typically not. And the other thing is, so the advantage is for large legacy databases, this works well, right? The other option is, hey, you're not going to be the database administrator, chances are. Someone else in an enterprise is going to administrate the database, and you're not going to have access to modify things, add tables, do all kinds of stuff at your desire and whim, or modify, drop stuff, kill data, move things around. You're not going to do that. Everything is protected, especially in a large enterprise where there's a lot of data that they've collected over the years. They want to protect that data. So they have administrators to do that, maintain the servers, the infrastructure, and everything else, right? So that's why, again, the database-first approach works, because you can take the existing data and the structure and model after it with scaffold out your classes and objects and draw out the relationships so you can understand the data. So that's why we're going to use the database-first approach. Questions around this? So Entity Framework is really an approach to scaffolding out our data for our application. Let's use it. How do I do this? So enough talk. like Conan says, right? Let's get to it. So let's close this down for a second, and the site master as well. And what I want to do here is modify my solution just a touch, and then as soon as we scaffold this out, we're going to take a short break, and we'll come back and we'll build the first two pieces of the CRUD model for, we're going to be able to create, and we're going to be reading. We can read, but we can't update or delete. We're going to do update and delete next week. Okay? So how do we do this? First of all, we need a models folder. Okay? That's what we need. Some place to put our models. So I'm going to right-click up here on the project, and I'm going to go add new folder models. Here we go. Wonderful. Next piece, after we do this models folder, is we're going to add a couple more folders just because we're going to need them later on. I'm going to add, try this again, add on the project, new ASP.NET folder, app code. What's it for? App code is really for, if I want to write a class, it's not related to a particular page, but maybe, for example, a utility class for me to be able to do stuff, right? Then I can put it in the app code folder, and I can share it, build it among the rest of my, the entire my application. I can use these utility classes to help me in different pages. It's actually another approach to creating custom classes, right? So app code, we're gonna do one of those. Add, and I'm also gonna add in, just in case we need to, another ASP.NET folder, which is called app data. And that's sometimes where we keep our backups of your database. Is usually what we keep in app data, as well as any kind of live file we want to put in. If we were working with a local database, we put it in there. Okay, we won't need that probably. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to right-click on models, and we're going to click add, and we're going to go to new item. Now, typically we go to web, but now we're not going to do that. We're going to go to data, and under data, you're going to see ADO.NET entity data model. Right? Now notice that down here, the name of the model is very important. We're going to call it the name of our application. When you make your next application for project 1, it's going to be a game tracker. That's your first program 1. It's almost like a tournament tracker, but a little bit different than what we did last time, where you're actually going to track 4 games all at the same time, different games, different contests, whatever you want to call them. And then when you do that, obviously you'd call that something different. You would call that some kind of like game tracker model. This is Contoso model because you're doing Contoso University. So let's put that in there. All right. And then we're going to click add. Okay. It's going to take you to this next step. Now, hey, look at this is the entity framework approaches. 1, database first approach. 2nd, model first approach. 3rd, code first approach. 4th, a hybrid of code first from the database. So kind of a little different now. But these are the main approaches right here, right? So we're going to click on this first one, Entity Framework Designer from database. If you're using Visual Studio 2013, you may have different options here because it's an older version, but more or less you want to choose the one that says from database. Click on this one and then click next. All right, notice that we don't have a connection. And if you do have a connection, that's okay. But if you don't, this is where it gives you a chance to create a connection. New connection. Notice that you may start off with a page that looks like this, right? And you're going to choose which kind of connection you'll get. You want this one, Microsoft SQL Server. And then click OK. Under the server name, you're going to put, again, your fully qualified server name, domain name. COMP2007 is mine. Database.windows.net. I'm going to change my authentication tab from Windows authentication to SQL Server authentication. And in here, I'll put in my admin username and my password for the database server, not for my Azure account, okay? If I did everything properly, I would save my password. I should be able to do this now. Pull this up, and I should be able to see my COMP2007 database. That's the database you named. Now, if I can do this, the next step is where it's going to create everything. So I'm going to click on OK. If you have a problem doing this, you won't be able to continue. If you forgot your username and password, you won't be able to continue. You have to make sure this is all the same as you've always used. Press OK. It's going to bring up this next screen. And what it's going to try and do is going to say, OK, so I've got this connection, right? Right now it's called COMP2007, COMP2007.dbo. That makes no sense, right? And it says, hey, do you want to include context-sensitive data here, like username and password? You know, for us, we're not really doing a secure site or anything like that right now. And even if we were, it's just for testing and learning. Let's put on yes. and because it'll save us some trouble. And then down here, this is very important. Do not press next. Down here, you need to save connection settings in web config, right? It's going to go to the web config file, which it's almost like our manifest for what's going on in our file. I want to change this from COMP2007 entities, which doesn't mean very much to you, to default connection. This is important because this default connection. If we were to make a template, default connection would be the same for all of you. If I made something like COMP2007 data entities, it might be different for all of you because everyone has a different database. So default connection is what we want to use here. Some people use also default context, right? Either default connection or default context is okay, right? And then click next. Now, choosing which version of the entity framework is also important. You want to choose version 6, okay? Click next. All right, here, what we're going to do is we're going to select which parts of the database we want. We only want tables, and we want all of them, right? So we don't want views because we haven't defined any views, and we don't have any stored procedures and functions. We're not going to choose those. Down here, we're also seeing that there's a model namespace. I want to make this Contoso model, like we did before. Notice that it says pluralize or singularize generated object names. When we do this, it's going to take the tables and drop off the S's so that that's what our classes and objects are going to be called: course, department, enrollment, and student, right? But there's going to be a bit of a problem because it doesn't know that courses is only, it ends in an E and not an S. Because sometimes courses could mean course is your original and SES is the plural, right? It doesn't know. So it's going to try and drop this. We have to correct it. Also, include foreign key columns in the model is very important to click keep on, because otherwise we would lose all our connections or relations. Let's click finish. Now, this is the big test. What it's going to do if it works properly, it's going to use NuGet Package Manager to go out, grab all your entity framework references and dependencies and install them in your application, right? As well as scaffold your C# classes and draw your diagram, your entity diagrams, right? Which is going to show each of the tables and the relations between all of them, just like this. All right, so it looks like it's completed. You can see that this is their model, and we have a problem. Look at this. Oh, course drop the E, right? Let's take a look at my Solution Explorer and see what I'm getting here. This is very important too. Notice it added all these extra references here, all right? Also notice that in my models folder, we have a Contoso model EDMX file. This is this model right here, this file, this drawing, if you will, right? And then look at my course class is course without an E. How do I modify this? Well, I want to change it here in the diagram. So I double click in this, kind of go to my diagram and add an E at the end of course, enter. And down here in my navigation properties of my enrollment table, I also want to change this to course, just to make sure that we're all make sense. It's all contextual. Okay, in order for us to take a change, make this all take effect, we don't want to modify this. This is scaffolded. This is automatically generated. So we just want to save this file. And once we save this file, the process of saving this file will automatically update and rescaffold all the classes that are attached to it. All right, so any change I make here, reflected here. So we will, for this demonstration, we're not going to ever modify these classes. Look how course is updated now. Course is now course with an E, right? I can close this model down. This is the model that shows different relationships between each table, but I can close it down now. Let's take a look at course or student. This is the one we're going to work with today, right? Student. So student, notice it says auto-generated. Please don't do anything in here, because if you do any changes, if we ever do any more saving into my EDMX file, it'll wipe all your changes out. So you don't make changes here, right? Notice how this has a couple of things, right? It includes a reference, right, to the collections generic as well as using system. And we have all of our fields registered here for our class. So we have our student ID, our last name, our first mid name, and then enrollment date, right? There's enrollment date with getters and setters for all of them, as well as any foreign keys that are mentioned here as an I collection, right? That's an I collection type. It's called enrollments. And this is what we're using. We use this as a foreign key. It's all generated for you. Now this we'd have to do like before. And again, this has only been around for a few years, 4 or 5 years now, entity framework, right? Before, we'd have to do all this ourselves. Map it out, test the classes, and from a code-first approach, a lot of people still like to do this because they have more control as a developer, right? Because they can make their classes, they can add different annotations to the classes, and so on, different limitations. They can do requirements at the class level, so as opposed to at the database level and all kinds of stuff. One other thing to note before we take a break is, if you notice over here, there is something called a Contoso model context. This is important because what this does is it looks at DB context. DB context comes from using system data entity, right? That's the entity framework class library. Takes DB context and it inherits, default connection actually inherits from DB context. That's why sometimes we might want to call this default context, right? Same thing. And it's the context for our database. That's what it is, right? So notice how we have these DB sets, if you will. Each set is related to a table. So courses, departments, enrollments, students. These are all sets of data. So I want you to think of it this way. When we kind of manipulate data in the server, we're using the same methods we would use with collections. For example, the add method, the remove method, and so on. We're using those methods to manipulate data on the server, same methods, okay? Okay, that's this piece. One more thing, sorry, I forgot to add this piece in there as well. Let's close this one up. I want you to see the changes we made to the web config file. So if I double click my web config file, you can see that it's added in the connection string that's called default connection. It's scaffolded all this stuff out for us, all the things that would have been required if we were to do it our own. Lots of work, and this is why it's rapid application development, even with Entity Framework. It's good and synchronized, and it makes sense. It complements web forms as well as MVC5 applications. Okay, let's take a short break. When we come back, we're going to use the Entity Framework and link, the whole link architecture, link structure, to access the data from our model and create our first student list.